Well, hello, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for the hot topic around 5-hour set, shoot, and strike. Um, when we a few weeks ago, it feels like months ago at this point, but just a mere few weeks ago, we were having an A1 discussion with some of the um, more well-known sports figures like Fred Aldis and Scott Pray, and what a cool opportunity to hear from guys that are not just really great engineers, but really good people to work with. And through that discussion, we started getting some notes from people around, hey, these are really awesome topics. We really enjoy them. Could you help us though with like the other 60 to 70 to 80% of the shows that are going on around the world that don't have days to put in and certainly don't have the same budgets? And that's what kind of led to today, where we said, hey, you know what? Let's help people. Number one, we're all going to been away from our positions for a little bit of time now. I know a number of people are still working. Our guest today, Mike Aiello from WGN-TV in Chicago, and Nic Dugger, founder of TNDV. You guys are still working. Maybe not necessarily, in the case of Nic, maybe not every truck's as busy as it was pre-COVID discovery, but we do know that that day is coming back. Mike working at a network television facility, your workload's kind of stayed consistent. Maybe not as exciting. He has a 2:30 a.m. call time every morning. So your gig's probably not as fun as my gig right now, which is I wake up just in time to go start a webinar. That'll change though. I'll get back to normal, so I'm not too worried. But today's discussion, we've got a guest moderator with us today, Rom Rosenblum, who is a frequent contributor to the Practical Show Tech family through his affiliation with ClearCom. So if you've been learning about LQ and the Matrix and Free Speak, you've heard Rom. And what you didn't know about Rom, though, is that Rom comes from the A1 perspective in his life. I just threw a little picture up here real quick just to prove that Rom was an audio guy at one point in his life before moving into the comm side. So he's technically still an audio guy. But as we were talking about this topic, Rom was like, you know what? Here's the reality. And I've asked him to be a part of our team today because he's going to bring the reality of the marketplace, right? Rom, you did a lot of sports for the local San Francisco Bay Area, right? And a lot of the teams that we're familiar with there. So that's what our intent there is today. So Q&A. Pete, I see people are still loading up. And
they're just stacked up outside there. They're giving them their programs and they're telling them to sit, 10 rows apart.
That's right, 6-foot spacing, all the above.
Exactly. And no popcorn is going to be sold in the stadium during this event, so get it now. When you ask a question, please repeat the idea which prompted it, just because it helps us. The questions won't necessarily be immediately addressed, and that will help. So, Kelly?
All right. So just by way of introduction a little more, Nic, you and I came across each other's paths a few years ago through the corporate space, right? And Hippie and I, Mike Aiello, have known each other for quite a number of years through the broadcast world, and as our careers, all of us have moved and changed. We intersect in a lot of different marketplaces, and today I really would like to help people understand how broadcast concepts can apply to the live event space, and how many of the things that live events do either grew out of broadcast, or there are some great techniques I think that live events are doing today that frankly I think in some of the broadcasts areas we could apply, and a lot of that is around comms, things like that. But Nic, you started out, you saw a need, and you built a truck company around what you saw as the technical, right? Where you the passion you have. This wasn't just, hey, I'm going to go find some clients. So just for a little level setting, just give us a few minutes about what brought you to make that kind of investment.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. I'm a big fan of the webinars, and I feel very lucky to be among this esteemed panel of folks. My history, like a lot of folks in the industry, goes back to really early childhood. I got into theater as a middle school teenager and really loved the production environment, the lights and the sound. But my life changed the first time somebody rolled in a fly pack and I saw a multi-camera, when I saw a switcher, when I learned about multi-track audio, and this would have been in the late 80s, early 90s. And through that, I found there was a company in the town I grew up in West Tennessee that had a mobile unit, which is incredibly unusual that a small town like ours would have had a TV truck, but they did. And I was convinced that that truck could have gone and done the Super Bowl. In retrospect, we struggled doing high school football, but in my mind, this was the pinnacle of mobile units. And that was it. At age 13, I was sold. I knew mobile television would be all I ever did. Didn't want to go to college, wanted to go right into the workforce, but found out Middle Tennessee State University, south of Nashville, had a student program with a TV truck. So I went straight to MTSU. It was the only college I even applied for, and spent every waking moment on that truck. In an odd twist of fate, we own that truck. When MTSU upgraded to an expanding side truck a few years ago, I bought the truck I grew up working on, and that's now part of our fleet. Left MTSU and went to work for National Geographic, doing live remotes in really unusual places, Amazon rainforest and active lava flows in Hawaii, and learned the art of live television in extreme locations. And then ultimately decided I missed being on trucks. So decided to design and build my first digital truck in 2003. And that's when not everybody had made the change to digital. SDI had been around for a number of years at that point, but there were still a lot of composite and component trucks on the road. So I wanted to build a digital truck. It wasn't quite time for HD yet, but that would come pretty quick. And I wanted to build a small form factor. There were plenty of 20 camera trucks. I wanted to have a 5 camera truck that could be run with only 2 or 3 people. So got a small business loan, built my first truck in my driveway, and it kind of took off from there. Fast forward 17 some odd years now, we have 21 trucks in the fleet. We also have 10 fly pack systems. Our biggest truck is a 24 camera 4K truck with a 256 input Studer Vista console and the biggest Grass Valley switcher money can buy. And our smallest truck is a small 5 camera 20-foot truck. And we kind of have everything in between. I was part of a merger in July of last year where Danny Harb and his sports division from Knoxville, Tennessee, Live Mobile Group from Calabasas, California, and Coastal Media Group, an uplink company, all merged together. So we've got offices all across the country now in just about every size and shape of truck you can imagine. We have an entertainment division, we have a sports division, and we have a corporate division, and do just about equal parts of all. So what this COVID-19 spin down has meant for us, we keep at least 2, if not 3 trucks on every PGA Tour stop. Well, that evaporated. We do lots of basketball, football, collegiate level sports. That's gone. On the entertainment side, CMA awards are probably going to be canceled. ACM awards were canceled. Stellar awards have been postponed. Lots of big award shows have just gone away. On the corporate side, the Walmart shareholders meeting canceled. Dollar General's big national management meeting canceled. But we're keeping our head above water. We are adapting. We're doing a lot of virtual events. We've done virtual award shows with no attendees. We're doing parking lot church at a number of locations that want a big LED wall and they want to do concerts where the attendees don't get out of their car. And lots of replacement events have taken the place of work we
Is it me or has Nic gone away?
Kelly, we've lost him.
Yeah, we lost your audio, Nic. We lost your phone audio. Oh. Oops. Oh man. All right. So we'll Nick's gonna get that one figured out on his end. While he does, I'm going to pull in Mike to the discussion here. One of the interesting things we've gotten is, and this is why I asked that question of Nick, what brought you here? Because we've heard over and over different stories of, I got in it to do this and now I'm doing that. You know, what brought you to broadcast those number of years ago?
For me, it wasn't such an obvious path. I thought I wanted to be an accountant. So I went to college for accounting. Halfway through freshman year, I was miserable. I hated it. Wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I was at Bradley in Peoria, is where I went to school. And so as soon as first semester was over, I changed my major and got a job at the TV station on campus, making $3.35 an hour. And yeah, WTVP, Channel 47 in Peoria. It was a PBS station. They had a small remote truck, so we actually did some Peoria Chief games. We did some Peoria Rivermen games. We did pledge drives. So that was kind of my introduction into TV, and I thought, you know, this is a lot more exciting than accounting. I like this. This is fun. And then my first job out of college was as a runner for ABC Sports, the 1989 PGA Championship. $50 a day, you know, go to Kmart and buy 100 bags, 100 garbage bags in a Rubbermaid tub, go to Radio Shack and buy these batteries and, you know, these connectors and cables. And that was my introduction into big time network television. And through meeting various people, I was introduced to WGN, and I freelanced with them for about 15 years, and then they hired me full time, and I've been full time with them for about almost another 15 years. And that's was kind of my introduction into how I, you know, decided this is what I wanted to do, and you know, that was my path, and I liked it. It was fun. So.
Absolutely. You know, the one thing that I know about both you and Nick, and this is kind of the idea of our discussion here today, is not just, while we are audio centric, and I believe audio is most important because it starts with A, that's at the beginning of the alphabet, and it happens to be what I do. The reality is that any production is bigger than just one department or one discipline, right? And both of you take on that tech manager role, right? The idea of you've had to play a couple different positions, and we'll get into what the A1 needs to show up with in just a second. But as a tech manager, putting both of your hats on when you're pulling together a show, I'm gonna start out with just a little humor for just a moment, so everybody just, you know, bear with me here. But you know, we always get the joke, even a monkey can do our job, right? Well, here literally a monkey is the TD for this given event. We're not suggesting that all TDs, of course, are monkeys. And we're not suggesting Rahm is a monkey by any stretch. So I accidentally went back to Rahm. So as a tech manager, let's talk about for a moment, what are the key things that you're looking for? Nick, I'll start with you. When you're going in, and I'm just gonna throw this up here as a discussion point. Here's a couple photos. One that Mike provided on the right, and Nick, your layout on the left there. As a tech manager, what is your role on a job? What do you think? I'll start with you, Nick. Is what do you think that role, that key role, the tech manager is, and somebody like me who is focused on maybe on one specific role in that, how should I think and interact with that person?
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard the title tech manager, and that was back doing Tennessee Titans games when they were still the Tennessee Oilers. That's how long ago that was. But I met the tech manager, and they all of a sudden seemed to be in charge. Previous to that, I think the technical director, the switcher operator, the TD kind of played crew chief until this tech manager role came into our world. And the most simple description I have is they're the liaison between the client and the EIC staff on the truck. They're interpreting the vision of the client to the technical folks But I assume most of you would agree we don't always want to put EICs directly in front of the client. So they're that soft cushion between the two to communicate what a dreamer needs to make a finished product. And that's how I describe what I do, is I can speak with the client and turn those budget numbers into what we're actually going to do on site. The picture you brought up here is the red carpet for the CMA Awards 2 years ago. This is a perfect example of us communicating what the client wants to get done in technical terms. Distances, cable types, number of cameras, where the microphones are going to go, on paper and on purpose, before we get on site, to where we can all deploy and be on the same page when load in begins.
Right. And Mike, you know, when you're going out, you know, as a tech manager for the remotes that you're doing for the station, you know, obviously here's a good picture of, you know, it looks like maybe lower whacker or something like that, or
It is.
you know, but besides the obvious, will the truck fit here discussions, because, you know, we're showing a 53 there, but so many times, you know, whether it's Nic's compact packages that I've been on before, or the OB vans that you have at the station, Mike, what are some of the key things as a tech manager you feel like your key job is and role?
Well, in addition to everything that Nic mentioned, the importance of site surveys and having a plan when you arrive. Where is the truck going to park? In this instance, will it fit? Is there a generator? Where's the generator going to park? Are we shore power? How do I get to transmission? Do I need phones? Is there internet access? What's our cable path? What else?
So let me ask you guys,
sorry.
both of you, a quick question. Rom, feel free to jump in on this. As an A1, right? I'm going to jump over to audio specifically for a second. What should I expect to get from a tech manager information wise, and what should a tech manager expect to get from me? You know, the top people you've worked with, what would you say are those key areas that set them apart?
Are you talking to me, Kelly? I thought you were talking to Rom.
Either one of you. And obviously Rom can you know, bring up some new questions too. But why don't we start with you, Mike? What are your thoughts on what I'm supposed to do as an audio person, whether it comes to comms or anything? What should I bring to the table? What should I expect from you?
What you should bring to the table is a good attitude and be ready to work. That makes the job a lot easier, is when people are prepared, ready to work, and have a good attitude about what needs to be done and the task at hand. From me, you would expect, in addition to tech book and any other information that, sorry, Kelly.
No problem.
Yeah, the tech book, any other information that I found out about the site survey, where the cameras are going to go, where the audio, you know, what your cable paths are going to be, and, you know, information like that, where your announce booth is going to be, what kind of needs that we're going to have up in the booth, on the field, what your other positions are going to be, that kind of information.
All right. So Nic, you know, based on that, obviously a lot of your stuff, you know, I'll speak from my personal experience on some of your gear. I've been fortunate to have a couple of your great, you know, I'll call them audio EICs, along with the traditional video EIC. What do you think that what should I be coming into the conversation with if I'm going to be the mixer, coming in on a show, or, you know, just in general? What do you look for from us from the outside?
Well, Mike hit on it. The magic word is tech book. I mean, that's our Bible. My goal when I write a tech pack is, if I can't make it to the show that day, that everyone still knows what they need to do because the tech book has been written correctly. You know, years ago, it would have been an input list from an A1. Now I want to know the type of cable, what strands of fiber my stage box are on. If I'm doing any IFB mix minuses through my console, I want every bit of information in that tech book to where everybody's on the same page before we get on site. I love having a stack of tech books waiting in the truck when I arrive, but I needed to see it a week ago. If I'm just telling my A1 what's happening when they arrive, I'm not doing my job. You know, the sports world, you know, CalRec is king. Everybody brings their show file and loads it. But in our world, especially in entertainment and corporate, we're working with Studer, Soundcraft, Yamaha. So I can't depend on an A1 having a show file to load and make that their show. So I assume they're having to program that desk from scratch. And if I don't give them all the information they need, they're not able to do that, especially with the massive infrastructures of Dante and Maddie. They're not only dealing with the audio side, but the comms and IFB side as well. All that should be on paper and dynamically updated. If we're making changes, those have to happen. So I'm still making tech pack changes at loadout. And crew look at me like, what are you doing? The show's over. Yeah, but there'll be another one. I had a tech producer recently that refused to work in anything but Microsoft Word. And that's a problem for me because I've got 8 very trusted engineers on this show site that are making constant changes. And that's why we embrace, you know, in our case, Google Documents to make a dynamic tech book with limited access. Some is read only, some has editing, some folks have editing capability. But if I'm not keeping that updated, then I'm a day behind. And on a 7-day show, I don't want to be back on day 2 when everybody else is on day 4 of the tech pack. So those tools have helped us dramatically in the last few years.
Yeah, you know, to tag on what Nic is saying, I think it's a constant process until you roll the close of the show. Everything is up for grabs. Everything has, you know, you need to constantly, as you're going through the planning process, adapt and implement any changes that might be thrown at you, which can happen during the show. You know, so it's constantly evolving until, you know, until your show is over, and it's. You know, so I agree with Nic that it's a constant, you know, it's always in flux.
Yeah, you know, I just like to add, as far as I understand the essence of your question, Kelly, first of all, a lot of the set, shoot, strike shows don't see a tech manager. They don't have anybody, and that's going to typically be a TD. Sometimes it's the EIC. Sometimes you have to go to the producer. Sometimes you have to make a phone call. And for me, if I could reach back into the Wayback Machine when I was an everyday guy mixing shows, my first question when I get on site, especially if it's not like, you know, a baseball series where it's just rote, but, you know, on a new shoot, you know, the first thing I want to know, because I was an A2, is what do I tell my A2? What equipment does he or she need to have? Where does it have to be set up? How many drops do I need? How many backup drops do I need? Where's the locker room? Kenneth Goodwin asked a great question about, you know, who's keeping up drawings? Well, first of all, drawings of your venue is for a set, shoot, strike is almost a luxury these days. Well, not these days. I don't know these days. I haven't been mixing in a couple of years. I kind of took shelter in a manufacturer's job, so I'm working off a muscle memory here, but I imagine it hasn't changed that much. These are things that are just, you know, you need answers to so you can start your day. And if you get stuck in that do loop of trying to figure out, well, where's my stuff, or do I set up this, or just set up a whole bunch of stuff and figure out, you know, later what I need, you've wasted a lot of time. And as an A1, your A2 is going to be coming up and asking you questions while you're still trying to figure out how many tape machines you have to put into the board, and do they have a drive for my digicard, or am I going to have to load everything in real time? All these questions are, you know, if you don't get them answered, you're spinning your wheels. So you've got to cuddle up real quick to whoever has information. And, you know, sometimes it's an unlikely person, like the truck driver. Don't know.
Well, that's an interesting point there. Let's just use that as a segue real quick to many times the truck driver is the EIC, or the truck driver, you know, or is a part of the show, right? You know, so many times we have these luxury, we read all these cool articles about the biggest and the best, which obviously they are, but the reality is everybody's doing a couple, 3 jobs sometimes. You know, Nic,
Right.
I know you're very passionate about the who is part of your team, right? You know, and your truck drivers and your EICs are very integral parts of the system. Can you just, you know, maybe talk about that for just, you know, a little bit? How are they extension of you? You know, are they the tech manager when there isn't a formal tech manager?
Well, as I mentioned, I grew up working on trucks at a pretty early age, and most EICs didn't want anything to do with the 17 or 18-year-old V3 that had a question. And I learned very quickly that if you could make friends with the EIC or the tech manager, your day became a lot easier. Something, when we're looking for full-time staff to run these trucks, we look for is that level of customer service. It's kind of a right brain, left brain thing. You either get a really solid engineer or you get a person that's a really good salesperson. Trying to find an engineer with sales-centric skills or customer service skills, that's a tricky find. Luckily, we've identified many of these people that are outstanding technicians, but that can also speak to a client without, let's call it what it is, without insulting them, because engineers do speak at a different level. But when you have an EIC that's also your video shader and is also driving the truck, they're going to end up in that client-facing role from time to time. So I think it was my experience with a few surly engineers back in the late 90s that showed me how important it was to find team members and staff that could be helpful and look for opportunities to help. It's a hardware issue too. Like I mentioned, CalRec is the standard for audio desks on most sports trucks. A lot of our trucks of the 21 in the fleet don't have CalRec consoles. And if an audio engineer shows up having never touched a Studer Vista, then my engineer knows that it's their expectation to help walk them through that. That's not the case on a lot of mobile units. There's not a lot of engineers that would go to the extra effort to help the TD understand how to control channels of the EVS, or to reach over to the Chiron operator that's now sitting behind an expression for the first time and help them through that. So when we've made our full-time staff selections, that's something we've tried to do, is make sure that our EICs and our junior engineers know that helping the team, helping the crew, most of whom are freelance, understand this mobile unit is going to help make the show better, and ultimately will be what gets us invited back. But to Rom's point, everybody wears multiple hats these days. Even on the biggest shows, multiple people wear multiple hats, and that get along and get it done attitude helps significantly.
And I got to say, Nick, you've done a great job. And from personal experience, about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years, I don't know when it was, I did it was like the nadir of my career. It was a rap two-stage thing at the Oakland Coliseum parking lot. There are 10,000 20-somethings who I lost my will to be in the human race watching these kids at this concert. And I walked into that truck, and I'd been on Vistas before, but it was a long time ago, and this was like 6 or 7 or more upgrades since I was last there, and I was lost. And, very often I've had to pick my way through a console that I was not quite used to and figure it out. And your guys were great. And I just want to say, all hail. You did a great job picking those guys up.
Appreciate that. That's great.
Yeah. The job itself was a nightmare. The production crew, and we've all been through these, and this is something we can also touch on. I think the director and the producer were somebody's, like, I don't know, godson and nephew, who were, as we used to say, playing television, had no idea what they were doing. And this was streaming to the internet. It wasn't, uplink to live, well, it was uplink, but it was streaming. And there were 2 stages. And so I was mixing for 2 shows and getting absolutely, sometimes we've all had to work with, directors who use telepathy, like, why didn't you do what I didn't tell you to do, which is why, by the way, I'm very proud of ClearCom. In our panels now, we have a button called Listen Again, where you can hit it and it'll play back what you just heard. So when they tell you, why didn't you roll VTX? Because you said why. No, I didn't. Push the button. Whoop, there you did. But these guys were just a nightmare. And again, not only helping with the setup of the board, but your guys were in there running back and forth literally between tape and production and audio, and talking to people who knew what they were talking about. And sometimes you have to do that. It's kind of like commando, it's like war. You go in, you got a plan, and after like 12 seconds, everything goes to the word that we probably shouldn't use right now, but you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. And that's not something
that's another resource.
We found that a lot of, not only truck companies, but, fly pack companies that are doing large corporate events, the customer service level, I think, is being encouraged on all crew. The days of that surly engineer we all knew, I think those are kind of going by the wayside. Everybody knows that they represent a brand, and regardless what company they work for, we're there to do a job. And I've noticed a trend, at least over the last decade or so, of a more communal feel on a lot of crews that, hey, we're all in this together. The client, the gig, maybe that one we've all talked about, but we still got to get it done. So I think as an industry, we've seen some great improvement on customer service across many different fields, entertainment, sports, and corporate work.
Yeah, not in every market, but yeah, it's out there. It's out there. If I can, Mark Kennedy is asking a question about, hey, it's a great question. Speaking Dante, as we alluded to, how much access to Dante should the audio crew anticipate? Obviously, I'm going to leave that up to you guys since I've been out of the loop for a while. But does the EIC give the truck ready, or does the A1 build the show, and how much? And I would imagine that a lot of this is on the A1.
I mean, for us, it depends on the show. Most of our fleet is built on Matty, but same idea. And it kind of pulls us into comms as well. When an A1 or a lead intercom tech wants to access your Atom file, do you let them? Do you let them start editing that file that has kept that truck alive? Or do you say, let me know what you want and I'll make the changes for you? It really depends on the show and the familiarity of that crew with the truck itself. But yeah, we've got guys that get into our matrix.
How well they know who the person asking to have access.
I can think back to a time early on in the career where I was mixing a lot of visiting shows, and you walk into a possible situation where it's a truck you've never worked on before, with a mixer you've never seen before, with a client you've never worked for before. So any help that you can get, whether a good attitude, but any help that EIC or anybody else on the crew that's going to help that process move along, and as you said, do what's right for the client and for the show, and get everything up and running as fast as possible. That's always key.
Yeah, well,
when we made the transition
I'm assuming that you keep a golden file hidden away somewhere just in case the inevitable happens and they, put inputs to inputs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I remember vividly when we made the transition from a party line truck, and I think our smallest trucks maybe had 6 or 8 PLs when we made the transition to Matrix. When an A1 asked for access to my AZ Edit, my first response was, hell no. I was just happy I had it working. I didn't want them to screw it up. But the reality is most of these freelancers know way more than I do about some of these systems. And I've learned to appreciate that knowledge. And I, it's a try before you buy. We kind of talk and make sure that I feel comfortable. But now it's commonplace. I mean, these guys teach us things every day. These guys and gals teach us stuff that we didn't know, which is, as old as AZ Edit is, I still learn something new every day.
Right.
Yeah. Speaking to that, we had Andy Rosen, the comms guy, on for a session a few weeks ago around AZ Edit, and he made a really good point. And obviously he was talking about the more advanced shows that happen, but one of the main etiquette points he brought up is always save the starting file so that you can restore someone's frame back, right? Because maybe you're really proficient at it, and like Nic says, you build up a good working relationship, and that EIC is happy to let you take that load off their shoulders. With the understanding, though, that I'm going to be able to get you back to at least where you rolled in, right? And having that backed up file, and that's just that's, and same thing with console files, right? Basic etiquette that are like, hey, I know you're going to be stretching the system, but I need to be able to restore this back to the show that is tomorrow, and you're not going to be here. And I may be very happy about that. If I'm the EIC, there may be a few people. To the Dante thing, Mike, I'm going to throw this back to you. I know the last time you and I saw each other on show site, there was actually a lot of Dante. It wasn't on really super duty, fancy Yamaha gear, but it was a bunch of Rio racks and some TFs, and that was the audio, the A1, if you will, because it was a very distributed system there. Who did you look to generate? Because you were also tech manager on that. So whose job do you see that being? The Dante and maybe less elaborate setups too.
In that instance specifically, I gave the A1 the opportunity to come to WGN and pre-build the file. So that kind of helped him be show ready and not feel like he was under any extra pressure when he arrived on site. So I left it up to him. I gave him certain guidelines, but I didn't micromanage. If he had questions, I would go in and answer his questions, because I have, as the EIC tech manager, I'm dealing with camera issues and audio issues and vendor issues and venue issues. And, so I didn't want to step on his toes and get in his way. I gave him guidelines, and I left it up to him to do what he felt was best.
Right. So, again, I think that's a lot of, this goes back to relationship, right? And trust.
Exactly.
Also, expectation there. I think that's the other thing is, we heard that in a session earlier today about clearly articulating what your expectations are. One of the things I've tried to do, regardless of what role or job I have, is what do you need from me? This is what I'd like to do. What are your expectations? Do you want me to do this? Do you want me to stop here, go there? And it sounds like that's a lot of that discussion. Rom, I think John Christie has some notes here.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And again, I'm going to have to acquiesce here to Mike and Nick, since I'm not an active everyday guy anymore. But for example, what he talks about is Google Sheets, and he's seeing tech books done that way. And to a point, there's some pieces of gear that specifically upload and download their AS67 multicast addresses and gain structures settings from online sheet directly. Now, I came into the world in tubes, so I'm going to leave this up to you kids to explain what's going on here. I can't imagine that everything loads in just from a Google sheet, but maybe I'm that much of a dinosaur.
I've been on a lot of shows that start out with Google Sheets and start out with Excel spreadsheets, and sometimes not even that. But no matter what it is, I always make sure I take my stuff and convert it and or edit my own Google Sheet. They may have already done a Google Sheet for all the comms, tech, and everything, but I just add another sheet to it that is formatted the way I like to work with it. And I request the tech manager to switch over and do the changes on my sheet. I don't delete theirs. Do the changes on mine, because it's all formatted for printing all my labels and stuff like that. I wish everybody would use Google Sheets, because it's sort of satisfying to actually be editing a sheet and then see somebody else make additions to the same sheet. Wow, I'm not alone here.
Right. And I think to John's point about addressing, right? We're going to be getting into more and more IP addressing, right? And Nick, I think, it's not so much, I think you hit on this very well, is like, we capture this information so we have it for the next time, not necessarily at that moment. It's already done. The patch is made. We know the path works, right? It's more about what we're going to be able to do with it the next time we're doing this show.
Well, and I'll give a shout out. Tech manager based in Nashville, Kent Green, is the one who I noticed initially staying behind when we're already on beer 1 or 2, and he's still at the truck tip typing away on that show book. I just assumed he's working on the next show. He wanted to make sure that if this client comes back, even if it's a one-off show, our notes were perfect, because it's so easy once you hit air to say, you know what, we're live, it's done. But I've regretted that so many times, not finishing out the tech book and copying it and saving it for my record. So shout out to Kent for giving me that good habit, but it's paid off many times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I would agree. Any changes that you have to your initial tech book that you've made during the show, I note everything. I write. I'm still a paper and pen kind of guy. I write everything down. I keep notes. I can always go back to shows I've done years ago and reference any changes that may have evolved, throughout the day. I can reference them and have that updated information for the next time we go back to that, that show, that venue, that event.
I'm sure you
we all have
to convert those all to Google Sheets, right? All your handwritten notes.
Absolutely.
Good.
We all have those clients and shows that we assume have gone away. And, I got a call from a client in Portland, Oregon a few weeks ago. We haven't done a show together in probably 10 years. Well, they're getting the band back together, and they want to start where we left off a decade ago. And luckily, I have that paperwork to start with.
Yep.
Awesome. Henry Cohn is asking a question. When does being the tech manager for the truck and broadcast cross over to being the tech manager for the entire production? And does that happen often? And I would like to footnote that in the set, shoot, strike world that I'm envisioning that we're talking about, a tech manager is an incredible luxury to begin with, let alone bifurcating the difference between a tech manager who's dealing just with the truck and maybe a production manager who's overseeing everything outside the truck. However, in regard and reaction to Henry's question, it's always been my experience that a tech manager is definitely going to oversee everything else and, you know, get their hands dirty with all the stuff that has to do with, you know, getting popcorn to the A1 or making sure the locker room is open or making sure that we have access to the bases if, you know, we're lucky enough to be able to put mics in there. I would imagine that's there. Henry, of course, works in the rarefied air of the big shows all the time, so maybe he's confusing things a little bit there.
Henry doesn't work in. I've hired Henry a few times, and I can promise you we were not in rarefied air events. But you know, Nick, I to that point, I know there are a few projects that you've worked on where you carry a lot more water than just, hey, I'm just the truck guy, right? You know, they look to you for a lot of other roles.
Well, and I tell you, it's kind of morphed into that, but I'll shout out another hero of mine, Tim Cubitt, who I'm lucky enough to do a few shows with every year, like the CMA Awards. You know, he's a technical producer. Now, on site, he is the tech manager while we're there, pulling cable, loading in, but he truly is a producer on the technical level. He could have tech managers under him while he oversees the whole show. So maybe to Rom's point, that additional role we're discussing that's above a tech manager would be something as simple as a tech producer. And I think the biggest difference there is the budgetary control they have, determining what monies can be spent. You know, the tech manager on site kind of has to work with what he or she has been given to work with. A tech producer leading up to the show can control what equipment shows up and can pull those purse strings if we need to. You know, my role, I began tech managing because I was the salesperson. You know, I booked the gig, I had all the information, my guys didn't know what the heck was going on. Okay, I'll come and I'll communicate it for you. That's back to my analogy of that translating from the client to the EIC. There's a middle ground there that needs to be filled by somebody to communicate the client's vision to make the final product happen on site. So it happened through the sales channel for me because I'd been negotiating what was on the invoice all along. I knew how many cameras were paid for. I knew how many RF logs they expected in that package. I had the information to make it more accurate. The tech book kind of manifested itself, and I realized I was tech managing. But yeah, it trickles down from the client and what they're willing to pay for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting question that Derek Hirsch brought up, and Nick, this is directed directly to you and very apropos of our modern times here. He says, here's a question for Nick. How is he updating his fleet to keep his EICs and freelancers safe when those powerful AC units will possibly be circulating viruses through the truck? Ooh.
It's a daily conversation, and I will preface this by saying none of this is finalized yet, but we had a load in today in Nashville, and the EIC started their day wiping down everything on the inside of the truck. Before that, the truck was quarantined for 4 days with nobody on board, assuming that viruses that are on surfaces would have time to expire. Every crew member is in a mask and that they stay on. The biggest challenge we're having now is what do we do?
Do you have
filtration? Yeah. Filtrations have not been installed yet, but they've been ordered. UV light to sterilize headsets between shows have been ordered. You know, gloves, masks, hand sanitizers are distributed per crew member, not per staff member, per crew member. We're making the baggies that have the camera operators' names on it with a pump spray, gloves, and a mask. We're writing the book. We don't know, but we're figuring it out.
Outstanding. ClearCam has had a lot of questions. If I can divert for just a second in this regard, we've had a lot of questions about this sort of things, especially about headsets. And what we're toying with doing, or maybe contracting out or throwing it out to people, I don't know what's going to happen in the end, but making a little kit, like you say, a little kit, besides the hand sanitizers and the non-latex gloves for the allergic among us, having a large windscreen with a small piece of Velcro, because you don't want to use cable tie, it's too hard to take off afterwards, that you can put over your headset's windscreen, your headset mic's windscreen, and ear socks to put over. You know, they were in fashion many, many years ago when, you know, in the Jerry curl era, when people would take a headset and it would be all scooged up from God knows what the last guy had on his head. Now it's actually a life-saving thing to put those little ear socks on. So these are things that we all have to start to think about, and the freelance community is actually helping us out with suggestions. So keep them coming.
I'll brag on your brand a little bit, Rom. All of our Free Speak 2 kits come standard with 10 headsets. That's a kit. It's a base station, it's antenna splitters, and 10 headsets. Where when we're shopping for the UV light sanitizers, which I know nothing about, we're looking for makes and models that can hold up to 10 headsets, so we can sterilize a kit at a time. The one-offs would just take too long. So our Free Speak kits are driving what we're shopping for sanitization of headsets. We can use the wired headsets as well. Obviously, all the Free Speak headsets have cables on them, so our PH88s and everything will fit as well. But it's our Free Speak kits driving that discussion. What can we fit from a kit to do one kit in one pass and process multiple kits in a short amount of time?
What do you know about damage of the UV to the equipment so far?
Nothing. Uncharted territory, because there's so many different types of material, between the soft goods on the earpiece itself, you know, to the headband, to the cable. Time will tell. We don't know yet. I don't think anybody knows.
One of the things we came up with on a couple of our COVID town halls were technicians should own their own headsets. And to that point, several manufacturers are offering dealer cost headsets with payment plans and for them. And secondly, windscreens and ear socks are expendables now for every single show.
And so, Mike, how do you guys go about dealing with this at the station now? You know, obviously you've got a lot of different protocols being permanent, but I would guess a lot of this is very similar. And you have any thoughts on where you think both the remotes and the studio are going to have to migrate to?
Well, what we're currently doing is splitting up the crew. So when a reporter goes out for a live shot, they used to take one car and all go together. Now the reporter takes a car, the camera person takes a car, the truck engineer is bringing the truck. None of them, other than to come up and pick up the truck and the car, none of them come into the building anymore. All their equipment stays outside. Every operator has their own spray bottle that they can spray down the truck and their equipment with. They have a separate bottle that they can take care of themselves with. Masks are distributed every day or every week as they need them. So they're making all these similar to the baggies, but just piles of equipment available to each crew separately. And as they need to refill, they come to either the news desk or the engineering department, and they have gallons of different levels of alcohol, different levels of cleaning solutions, that whether it's for personal, for equipment use, that they can refill as they need. So that's being distributed to all the crews, to each person and each reporter independently. We also are encouraging, and they have been having most of the reporters work from home that are normally in the studio. So the weather person, the traffic person, all those type of things, they're all working from home. So it's a bunch of DeGero live shots. And that's kind of how they've approached it.
Yeah, so you have graphics people, you have mixers, you have switchers. People are working from home in not only talent but also in crew.
Right, and for us, we have 3 control rooms. Excuse me, we have 3 control rooms. So we're putting ADs in one control room, directors in another control room, producers in another control room, and then the engineers are whichever control room their equipment is in. But we're splitting people up through different control rooms so that the people that have to come to the building to work are working in separate rooms.
Yeah. By the way, in regard to the cleaning, there are things that you need to be aware of. Certain cleaning and sterilizing products are not so great. As Ryan McLaughlin brings up, UV can be dangerous to you. It's not so great for the skin. It's certainly not so great for the eyes. It looks good, you know, when you've got day glow on your shoes, but you know, there are the precautions you have to take. Clearcom, and not only Clearcom, but other manufacturers also on our websites, we're putting instructions for how to clean different kinds of pieces of equipment safely and efficiently. And people should check that kind of stuff out, because when we go back, we're going to want to do that sort of thing. You don't want to make sure you don't put a solvent on a piece of material that really can't take that. So there are precautions you're going to have to take.
Yeah, and absolutely. And don't be afraid to reach out to the manufacturer directly. What do you recommend? I reached out to Electrosonic. We have all Electrosonic mic and IFBs in the studio, and people wanted to use the traditional Clorox and Lysol wipes, and those are incredibly abrasive and abusive for the equipment. And Electrosonics, they said anything with a 70% isopropyl alcohol will more than sterilize or kill any of the germs on there. Anything more than that, like if you get into the 90, 99 plus, they tend to evaporate too quickly and not even be effective in.
Yeah, it's not so great for certain surfaces also. So.
Right. So I actually found a place that has, and I sent Kelly this information before, a size of the wipe, like when you get a shot, when they clean your skin before you get a shot. So it's perfect for like a mic or an IFB. There's no waste, so you don't have the big typical wipe.
That's right.
There you go.
These are 8x10.
Meters on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
8x10, 75% alcohol wipes.
Yep.
$1 a piece.
Yeah, I used to carry around the ones that my wife's a diabetic, so before she does a pump now, but she used to do needles, and I used to carry them around in my bag back in the antediluvian times. I would use those to clean off the earpieces, to take the ear scooge and wax off, and it never dissolved any of those little Barbie butt plug rubber things that we stick in our ears. And
they're all individually wrapped. They're a perfect size. Like I said, there's no waste to anything. You're not throwing away excess material. So it's a great product to have on it, and they're inexpensive. I found 600 of them for a couple bucks. So it's
I think we'll see in the next year or so a lot of these standards and practices will come in documentation form before a show. There's a team in Middle Tennessee, the Nashville Filmmakers Guild, that has a 60-member panel that's writing this manifesto. And Kelly, I'll share it with you so you can share it with the group if you'd like. And it's in heavy debate right now. Questions that are popping up. Is a freelance contractor liable if somebody gets sick on set? If someone gets sick the morning of a show and they call in, do they get sick pay? And the big topic is, are we as producers going to be held responsible for having a crew member responsible for safety on site? Someone whose job it is, be it a production manager or a production assistant, that's making sure gloves are on and making sure masks are being used, who pays that day rate? How do we qualify them? And this is for not. Right.
It's all
going to be our world.
To the OSHA,
It is.
OSHA mandate, I think, because shows like that are required to have an OSHA certified person on big shows all the time already.
Right. So Nic, I guess here's a question that I would pose to you. In the past, we obviously know that when we're on a truck, our job is to make sure all the bits get back, right? If I take mics out of the cabinet, what mics did I use? The number of packs, right? Same thing with, Hippie it's courtesy number one, and it's actually your job number two, to make sure that everything that you took out of the truck gets back. I'm curious, do you see the role of, and this could probably go across multiple disciplines, but I'll use the audio for example. Do we see that as the A2, when those mics are going out or coming back, is that their job? Should that be a role that, hey, I'm going to wipe this down and I'm giving out this comms pack, or I'm wiping this down, I'm giving out this microphone. If I'm the A1 at the end of the day, is it my job to wipe down the desk, right? Or when I show up,
Yeah, my EICs have struggled with this as we're giving them new instruction. I had an EIC who may be watching now, but he asked yesterday, if someone's not following the rules, can I throw them off the truck? And I'm talking about viral related rules. I'm not talking about foul language or spilling a Coke on the switcher. I mean, if they're sneezing and putting their hands on other people, are they responsible for that? And it's a tough question. I didn't have an answer. We discussed it. To answer your question, my opinion is that on a show site, if the hardware is moving between multiple talent, multiple crew people, then yes, I would expect an A2 to wipe down a mic before it went to the next guest. At the end of the day, at loadout, I feel like it's the responsibility of the D-Prep team at the shop to take the truck and prepare it for the next show. I would not expect an A1 to disinfect a console at the end of the day. Their job is done at loadout. We can clean the truck when it comes back. I wouldn't ask the A1 to scrub the muddy floors from dirty shoes either.
Mhm.
I would appreciate it if they did, but I feel like it's our job as a mobile unit provider to prepare the mobile unit for the next show. So I would say same use, same day, yes, absolutely appropriate. If it's flipping the truck, to me, it feels like that's something we do back in the shop, along with all the other duties on de-prepping a truck. That's my opinion, though.
I agree with Nick. I think with as time consuming as a process as that could be, the client might look and say, well, this is something that should be done in a shop. I don't want to run into a potential overtime issue with the crew, to have the A1 spend an hour wiping down microphones when the truck's going to go back to the shop and they're going to unload it and maybe do a re-inventory or repack things and get it prepped for the next show. It should be done then and not necessarily on my dime, like I said, with a potential overtime issue. So
Yeah.
I think
Kelly, you mentioned the word
is going to look at
courtesy.
it the same way.
On the other hand, producers used to be used to paying a little more time to the audio crew because they had to re-battery everything either after the show or before the show. Well, now we use rechargeable batteries for the most part, so that's gone away. But that kind of extra half hour on each end of some parts of the crew will have to be recognized, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly, you mentioned specifically courtesy. I
Mhm.
hate to use the muddy shoe analogy, and this might come back to bite me in the rear end, but when we're shooting Bluegrass Underground for PBS and the crew is in a cave all day, it's courteous that they knock the mud off their shoes before they come in the truck, but they don't have to. I'll clean that mud up before the next show. It would be courteous if you didn't sneeze on the console and you did wear a mask and you swapped gloves every day, but you don't have to. But it would be courteous.
No,
Well,
that's yeah.
this brings up a point that Kelly and I were discussing before, and I think I wrote about it in that. I don't think you posted it, but that.
I will be.
Okay. And this is pre-COVID, post-COVID, whatever. We need to talk a little bit about when you get on site after you've done, look, we all have to do a little socialization here, albeit 2 meters apart, but that always happens. And you get your marching orders from whomever, whether it's a TD or a tech manager or a producer, your A1 and your A2 powwow and all this stuff. And okay, we start moving. How important do you guys feel it is to do a little pre-inventory? Because I don't want to get tagged at the end of the show and say, well, your A2 didn't bring back so-and-so. Well, it just so happens that I looked and I counted the turnarounds and there were only 12, not 15. And you're saying it's 15. So there you go. I mean, how much of a part of that is the show, especially thinking Set Shoot Strike has a different dynamic because you're just running and gunning. We don't have the luxury of a set day or two that some of the big shows have. How do you guys feel about that kind of stuff?
For me, as an A1, A2, when I'm pulling equipment and cases out of the bay, I open up everything before it leaves the truck dock. If the truck has a booth kit, as an example, I open it up and make sure, are there 3 headsets? Are there 3 IFB boxes? How many hand mics? How many turnarounds? How many Telex earpieces? I inventory everything, compare it to what the box is labeled as, and if there are any discrepancies, I tell the truck EIC right away before that thing ever leaves the truck bay.
When you're giving it.
Yeah, exactly. When you're given it. As an A1, if some of the mics are stored in the audio room, same thing. Make sure that every slot has a microphone in it. So, I do that every show, every time.
There's a time cost analysis too that has to be done. I'm not counting BNC barrels. If we're 10 short, we're 10 short. But when I'm missing a shotgun mic, I still to this day, there was an invoice TNN sent me 15 years ago for a shotgun mic I lost that I was convinced never came out of that drawer. But I couldn't prove it and I had to pay the invoice. So our shop counts in and out. And then at the end of every D-prep, we get a missing list. And a lot of times it's expendables. You lose a 6-foot Stinger, so what? But we're missing an entire Sennheiser headset. That's worth at least calling the venue, checking back with the A1. So it's an investment versus time issue for us.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
I think we have responsibility as crew, as A1s, as A2s, stage managers, everybody. We have a responsibility. There has to be that symbiotic relationship with the crew and the truck. We're going to see you again another day, and if we're dicks, we're not going to have a good time, and it's going to end up being, which brings me to another subject. the A2 for the A1 or the A1 to the A2, it could go both ways, or anybody in the production crew. The clock watcher, the I don't want to do anything, I'm only going to set up the booth and not help anybody else, or I won't move that. How do you guys deal with that? I remember having in my tenure as an A1 several issues with several A2s that just didn't want to, they wanted to make the money the A2 was making, but they were really utility types, or they were brilliant A2s and they were just dicks and they didn't want to work and they didn't want to, they wanted to give me a hard time. How do you deal with that?
I mean, we do enough shows, typically around 600 different invoices a year, some 5-hour set shoot strike, some are 7-10 days on site. I've learned to just let karma sort them out. If somebody's not going to do the job, I've blown up at crew members and then regretted it and had to send that email the next day. Sorry, I lost my temper. If somebody doesn't do the job, we typically just step up and get it done. And again, hope karma sorts it out. We don't book them again, or we know what we're getting into when we see them on a show site. But you're absolutely right. There's both of that category out there, and your reputation goes worldwide. I mean, Rom, we've never had the pleasure of meeting, but you've worked on my trucks and you had an opinion of me before we even met. Our industry is not that big. We all know one another. And when we see crew lists, we have those days when we roll our eyes, and then we have those other days when we're excited because we get to work with people we love working with. But my best practice is to let karma kind of sort it out. I'm not going to change them by yelling at them, and I'm not going to be able to change them by lecturing them. So I nod, smile, and if I need to step it up a bit to make up for somebody that day, I'm happy to do it. And hopefully it doesn't happen often.
I agree completely. If you try and discipline them, yell at them, do whatever it is, you're just going to make it harder. They're going to want to do less. They're not going to work as hard. Just get the job done, deal with it later. For me, I also do crewing at WGN for our remotes. So, I'll take that, lock it in the memory bank. And when I need an A2, that's the last person I'm going to call.
There you go. Okay.
I'm going to call the guy that showed up 5 minutes early and, hey, how can I help? What can I do? And, if you see a camera guy struggling, don't leave the camera guy just because you're an audio guy and he's the camera guy. Reach over and help him lift the case, help do, so that's going to be one of the first people I call. I will take somebody who's less experienced, but who's willing to hustle and do what it takes under whatever circumstances to get the job done. That's my first call every time. And when that person gets on the job, if they're struggling, I'll stop doing what I'm doing and help that person because I know that they have good intentions and they want what's good for the show. So, those are the people that I want to be surrounded by.
Can we go to a couple of more questions?
Yeah, hang on before we do that, because we're in a really interesting spot that I like of the what not to do, right? Because that's exactly what we're talking about here is what's that person you don't want to be, especially, economic 095, right? So we won't even get college credit for this class, and that is supply and demand, right? And right now, supply is very high and demand is very low. So as we start to go back to work, being genuine, right, obviously is important, but also understanding what is important to the person that's writing your check or suggesting to their client that they call you to work, equally important, right? So I grabbed a picture, a couple pictures here that Hippie sent me. This one, if you zoom in on your screen, is you'll probably see my mouse. I'm pointing to these two shotgun mics that are pointed straight out from the visiting team, right? That was in, and I was joking that this is the XY or the why not the XY this way, right? Because this person just literally dropped the mic over the wall, gaff taped it. You can see the gaff tape there. So obviously they didn't want it to blow around and move, and that was really good of them. But it's pointing at the back of a speaker and absolutely none of the audience, right?
You got to give them credit. At least they pointed it at the back of the speaker and not the front of the speaker. So
at least it in front,
A for effort.
A for effort. But this is somebody who apparently looked at the radio booth and said, "Oh, well, it works for the radio guys. It's got to be good for me." But this would probably be that perfect example of, well, you told me just to hang the mics out, and whether you
didn't tell me at all. You just said I want crowd mics, and you didn't tell me at all.
Right. Yeah. When you're looking for somebody, obviously, Hip, when you're mixing a show, that team, you get assigned certain people, and in your case as a tech manager, you get the choice sometimes of who's going to be my team member. But when you saw this, I know this wasn't one of your team, but I recount for us just the clean version of what you explained to your A2, how this was an example.
So I had an A2. It was the first time we worked together, but we've worked around each other for quite some time. We knew each other really well. And I said, showed him that as an example. And I said, if you ever do this on one of my shows, I will kick you in the shin. And, I was joking and all that, but it was, I used it as a teaching moment. He was a hustler. He was a young kid. He was still relatively new. And you can tell there's a short shotgun and a long shotgun. So in defense, I don't know who this person was. Maybe they were the last two microphones on the truck. So I'll give him that. He could have swapped them out with some other microphones or whatever. But I try to use that as a teaching moment. As an A1, your A1 will not be happy with this kind of thing, and kind of try to guide him into other ways of making that a better installation.
Right, exactly. And I'm going to move ahead to the second example of what not to do. Right?
Yeah.
This was
That's a great picture.
yeah. I mean, it's Chicago, and obviously Illinois had a big pot push last year. And this isn't really a statement about whether we think it's good, bad, or indifferent. This was somebody who decided to bring a passion they had for something to the workplace. And
did that make it to air? Did that go out on a broadcast?
No. So what this is it's a Bears game. He's a parab operator. And what he did when the submixer was assigning, okay, you're going to do this parab, he asked to do the far left parab so that no game camera could see his back.
Okay.
But unbeknownst to him, his back was to the press box, so all the Bears people saw it. Bears contacted Fox contacted the union, and it was an extremely ugly time, to the point where Fox had to, backpedal a little bit and try and defend their position with the NFL. The union had to defend their position with Fox, and the union almost lost the contract because of this. So, like Kelly, there's a time and a place for everything, and making these type of political statements at work it's not what your client wants.
I thought it was all about networking. I don't understand.
It's all about
legalized IT, right?
IT,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Legalized IT. Everybody
Forgot
knows
the point.
Exactly.
But it's interesting because, again, it's meant to be humorous, which it kind of is. But it's also to say, you know what, we live in a different world now, folks, that coming out of this, regardless of your position on anything, you're there to work, right? And maybe just, I think that's, a reminder to myself as well, not that I'm really worried about legalizing pot on the job site. I am thinking about how do we communicate, right? And the importance of being civil in a discussion, especially around, I was looking at some of the questions regarding the idea of cleaning, right? And what our role is as an A2. We're going to be very passionate about this for a while, right? Everybody's going to be on job site going, this is too much, right? Or we're not doing enough. It's going to take a while to figure all this out, right? And does that mean that we shouldn't express our positions? No, I don't. I think we should, but the how we do it is more important than just the topic itself, right? And I commend you, Nick, and you too, Mike, for figuring out, right now we're still in the phase of we don't know what we don't know about virusing and sun lamps and UV lamps. And hey, this is great. We'll put occupancy sensors, we'll run them in the control rooms when nobody's there. A lot of cool things we can figure out at some point, right? But the how we do, if I show up belligerent with you, Nick, or with you, Mike, hey, if you don't do what I think is safest, blah, 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 getting all in, I think that may be a bigger takeaway here, right?
Well, and I'll give you a warning. I hope most of our attendees today have started to get a sense of when they may get back to work. But I remember the first show we did post-quarantine, Garth and Trisha decided they wanted to do a little music special on CBS, just a little 1-hour jam, show up at his studio, 2 or 3 cameras. But it was the first time we set foot on a show site after lockdown. And it was scary. Your first show back, you're going to be hesitant to touch and do, and it's a very unusual feeling. So be prepared for that. Wearing a mask seems like no big deal until you put your headset on and realize that, well, my headset feels different and I sound different in my fold back. Be prepared for a bit of an adjustment period getting back to work, whatever the standards are. The Garth and Trisha thing was a month or 2 ago now, so we've done a lot more since then. It's becoming way more casual to sanitize hands in and out of the truck, to wipe down console surfaces. But there's an adjustment period. It's not just a fallacy to think that this will be easy to adopt to. It's weird. It feels weird. And then people you bear hug when you see them on shows, now there's a hesitancy. You can't even shake hands. And these are our family members and guys and gals we've worked with for decades that now we've not seen for months. It's going to be unusual to see them and not slap them a high five. So mentally prepare yourself that it's going to be an adjustment period.
You know, Dan Newburn brought something up that I think is worth specifically mentioning here, about the initiative that the A2 or anybody should be taking in cleaning. And he ends his question is, am I out of line to want to bring my own expendables? I don't think that's ever the case. You know, I think that certainly as an employer, one can't expect you to go out and buy your own stuff, although it's tax deductible. However, when I was an A2 back a long time ago, or an A1, which was additionally a long time ago, I brought a lot of my own stuff out, and I felt it made me better, and it made me feel good that I was going that extra mile. Whether it made an impact on anybody else, that would have been nice. But I think the whole paradigm of going the extra mile, and especially now with the COVID paradigm, that's going to change the way we all work. And how does it hurt for you to spend an extra $2 or $3 to put some wipes in your bag, or, you know, have an extra gloves so, you know, when you mic up the talent, they don't feel they're getting your cooties. I think it's a great idea. You know, Jason Knapp asks about what about everybody getting their own headsets? I don't know that anybody can require you to do that, but geez, I mean, that's an investment right now that I think everybody should make. Not just because I work for a company that makes headsets, but if at the very least, you know, make sure that you have a big fat windscreen like that would fit over a 58 or something like that, that you could put over your windscreen on your microphone, and either find, buy, or make ear socks so that, you know, you're not getting anybody's cooties from before, no matter how well they're cleaned. You know,
anything that makes you more comfortable when it comes to doing your job. So, you know, a better presentation in front of the client, whatever it takes to make you feel better, to do your job more effectively and efficiently. And like you said, if you spend a couple bucks, you spend a couple bucks. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's out of line at all. I think a lot of people will probably be doing it.
Sure.
The biggest difference for me is when I used to see crew alcohol wiping their headsets, I'd roll my eyes like, what a weirdo. Now it's like, okay, maybe not so weird. Maybe you were on to something.
Yeah, really.
So hey, Rom, let's dive into Mickey's question here. That's kind of that 5 hour. Can you dive deeper on the nitty gritty of running cables and wrapping them out very quickly on location, right? So, you know, I've heard all these different viewpoints. You know, sometimes we'll try to be the last in, so we're on the top of the pile. Selfishly, sometimes we'll take as a divergent path. But you know, Hip, what do you? I'll start with you, Mike, and Nick. Feel free to weigh in too, and Rom on, you know, how to deal with cables, because I know this seems like such a basic, but this is really the heart of what takes the most amount of our time, whether fiber or whether copper. You know, thoughts?
Yeah. For me, mulch sheets, so that there's a very specific, everybody knows, okay, there are 5 DTs, there's a Tri-X mult, there's a fiber mult. It's going from this part of the truck to this IO panel. Just being very detailed with your paperwork so that everybody knows what the cable route is, how many there are. So when it comes to strike, you're not accidentally unplugging the home show from the panel because the visiting show finished first and the home show is still on the air with a post-game show. So, you know, I've gone as far as put my mulch sheets on the wall when I plug into the panel so that they know the ones in pink with labeled like this are mine and they're free to, you know, free to disconnect. So, you know, just very detailed stuff, again, like Nick said earlier, so that if something happens to me and I'm not there, somebody else can come in behind me and know exactly what my roadmap is.
You know, for me, from the perspective of the mobile unit provider, I feel like it's on us to clearly label the cables. So any cable, DT, SMPTE fiber, triax, it needs to have a company logo near either end and a color code to indicate the length. And I know stickers fall off, but to the best of our ability, on either side of the cable, I want to know whose it is and how long it is. And then as far as the show site goes, I think you have to effectively communicate who's pulling what, especially on the short 5-hour days when everybody, when the TD and the director are pulling cable with you, you have to know who's pulling what, verify genders before you start, extra paper tape to label what's going where. And then I attempt to load in by gauge. I want the heavier stuff first. Get the feeder down, get power done first. Then I want to see the DTs and the camera cable molts. And then I typically save tack fiber to the last because it's lightweight on top, comes off first. You know, in some situations you don't get that luxury, but if it's only a 5-hour day, you have the ability to say, okay, feeder first. All right, DT in, separate them, make sure there's no interference. Now go in with your camera cables and your fiber. I think having somebody conduct that orchestra, get the tech manager out there at the IO panel, pointing and saying specifically what to do when, over communicating on a 5-hour day is not being bossy. It's helpful and necessary in most cases.
Communication is king.
On the longer shows, like when you're there for 10 days, it can't hurt to touch base with every other vendor who's running cables and make sure you know what the rules are. Because I've been on shows where, like the Olympics, where we loaded in, we were doing the Olympics and the Paralympics. Well, in the 2-week period, NBC cut every one of our cables and took them out because they weren't doing the Paralympics. So after that, the next Olympics, we labeled every cable every 20 feet. But, you know.
Do not cut here.
Exactly.
But so that there's a question then is, you know, we have all this stuff going on and obviously in our example here, the 5-hour set shoot, also, or really any project, the natural tendency, I think, is that we all want to, we're very involved. Get out there, roll it, get it going. How many times have we seen cables being tugged, pulled through another pile, right? And that connector, you know, that's fine, you know, on maybe your feeder cable, right? But as we move along in these different connectors, especially where RJ45s have become industry standard connectors, which kind of, that's a whole nother webinar topic to itself. I'm not talking EtherCon, I'm just talking OpenCat 5 connectors. You know, the challenge of saying, yeah, I don't have a lot of crew, but I need a second person making sure that, and you know, one of the reasons I contacted you, Nick, was because you have a personal vested interest in those units, right? So many times
when
we
you
get
pay for
on
the
stuff,
cable,
hey, you're owned, this is owned by this big conglomerate. I don't really care about that connector because this DT12, half of the channels don't even work anyhow, right? Best I can do for them is send them back a broken cable with everything not working. That's how we feel sometimes, but that's not really, you know, obviously not best practice, but you know, I just know, speaking from my personal experience, or when the hockey rink ice melted overnight and I came in the next morning and every snake was submerged in ice water, right? So as you're rolling it up, you're like, oh my God, this water is so cold. Somebody brought up something about the cold cables, ironically enough. Do you wrap them with larger wraps to not crack the jackets, right? What, you know, obviously in Tennessee, you guys don't get as much cold weather as say us up here in Chicago do. But you know, I'm looking at the bay and I got to get all this stuff back in a trunk. Again, what do you expect when something goes back to the shop? You know, how do you expect it to come back, Nick?
well, I mean, we are based in Nashville, but we do more shows in LA and DC every year than in Nashville. So when we're doing an event in Salt Lake and it's been in snow for 7 days, my preference is just physically shove it on the truck rather than damaging the cable. and trying to force a frozen cable to fit in a belly bay. I'd rather take the mess inside the truck and save the multi-$1,000 cable. But that's if I'm there. You know, the tech manager has to make that call. And that's something you have to hope that your freelance tech manager respects your equipment. You make a great point. I grew up wrapping everybody else's cable, and then starting in about 2004, every cable I saw was something I had to pay for. And you look at a Triax cable or a SMPTE cable a lot different when you spent $2,500 out of your pocket for one cable, and you're doing a 10-camera show. So it changes your perspective. And what it's changed for me is now that I'm working on other mobile units and we're doing multi-truck shows, I feel my reaction to other people's hardware different, because once you've paid for it out of your own pocket. So it's a tough ask, but if more crew treated the cable as if they paid for it out of their pocket, you know, they would walk 10 feet to make sure those RJ45 tabs weren't hung up in the carpet, and it changes your perspective for sure. But I would rather not damage the equipment. If it means the truck arrives messier because we had to throw some rat's nests on board to give it time to thaw, no brainer. Again, we'll de-prep it at the shop. Let's complete the show successfully, not damage any of the inventory, and take that time we have in between shows to clean up. And we don't always get to go back to the shop. Sometimes de-prep happens at the truck stop, and we're having to flip gear and redo cable counts while the truck is running, getting refueled. But I'd still rather not damage equipment. So that's my take.
You know, we've done that in Chicago. You know, trucks being outside and, you know, a foot of snow by the time you're ready to strike, we've, you know, just gathered up the cable and thrown it on a truck many, many times. But what helps eliminate some of that is taking your excess coil, you know, if you have an extra 100 feet or whatever, leaving it inside where your IO panel is, inside the building, and only drawing out exposed to the elements the amount of cable that you need, plus a little bit of slack for, you know, anything that may arise. But that helps eliminate some of that. But absolutely, we've had to do that many times where, you know, let the truck get back to the shop, let it thaw, clean out the truck, and recoil it.
And if you can, you know, bust the IO and get that last 100 feet back in the venue, and then go strike the booth and strike cameras, a lot of times those things will come back up to above freezing before it's time to coil those. You might have to change the order of your strike, and you might have to release some of your crew before they do what they would normally do to wrap out a show. But It's worth it if you don't damage every end of 15 of your cables. Just get it back in the loading dock or back inside a little bit and let it thaw for 15, 20, half an hour while you do everything else.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. I just threw up a little picture of the, this is a nice tidy fiber area, right? I think this is from Mike, this is out at Arlington.
Yep.
And so, you know, this is a pretty organized area as those things go. Not every area is so luxuriously appointed. I'm gonna slap this picture up here real quick. All right. Now, this isn't a slam on the people that had to do this, because we understand that a lot of times that open bay may be the only place you got. We get that, right? But talking about cable labeling and, you know, and those kind of things, how to be more mindful of what is around us, right? And obviously I can see, if you can see my cursor here, looks like they gaff taped over that switch, which is great. You know, this is good, right? That is a best practice right there. If you have a power switch, you always gaff tape the power switch on, right? Let the fuse blow. The switch is irrelevant other than it should light up. But the idea here that you know, when we're looking at these, that label, and then when it all comes out, Rom, I thought I saw somebody had it was A. Mitchell's had something here about bagging the ends of the cables before you pull them back, right? Yes, is that extra work? It is extra work, but when we start thinking about what is the cost of that, and as well as the relationship we want to have with a given truck provider.
Or there are a lot of DT cables that have that little sheath that goes over the bell, and more often than not, I remember seeing, you know, utilities or people dragging a cable, and the sheath was like 3 or 4 feet down cable from the end of the bell and wasn't doing it any good. It only takes 12 seconds to stick it up there and pop it on. I don't understand that part.
And not pulling it by the connector itself, pulling the cable, either
Oh,
make
yeah.
a coil and pull it by the coil, or pull it a couple feet down from the connector so that
Down.
you're not
Right,
yanking
right,
on the
right.
connector and stressing what's inside. You know, in this instance with this picture, I'm guessing some of those labels are from the show prior. You know, in
That's
this instance,
Never.
what this person could have done was the FS1s, the frame sinks, put them inside the truck and go through a mouse hole and put all this, all the cabling, run it through the truck and dress it inside. And
You
that would
don't
protect it a
have
little bit.
room in the truck, yeah.
There's
Yeah.
always
We were talking
counter
about
space when you're talking about transmission. And in this instance, the street
Transmission
is
is-
parked on a public street. So people are walking by and all that other, you know, there's a lot of things that could have gone drastically wrong here.
Right, right.
Do what you need to do to protect your show.
But you don't know.
Picture makes me think about our
SOS
tech
might
pack
have delivered-
discussion.
What's that?
Go ahead, Rom.
SOS. I'm saying SOS may have delivered these after the production crew had already arrived. There's no room inside the truck to move around. So in this case, I understand this. If it was me, I would have recessed them a little bit, found a way to do it, and maybe put some cones around it. For all we know, there were some cones around it. But that doesn't look like a street. It looks like it's maybe in an arena or something. God forbid it should be a street because, you know, when
There's a gas
Clem-
cylinder on the side. That's a
public.
belly bay beside a power bay, and that's
Yeah,
that's
there
where
you
I
go.
sat for many shows growing up. That was my
okay.
assigned workstation in the belly bay.
Right.
I see we see the 5-wire video mult there. We were talking about tech packs earlier. To convey the level of detail that I shoot for in my tech packs, you know, I would never list a 5-wire video mult as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to know what the tech manager expects on the red line, the blue line, and to this day there's still a debate. Is it red, green, blue, white, yellow, or yellow, white? I've heard arguments on both sides, but if it's spelled out in the tech pack, we know which one of those FS2s gets which color input. And that information, it's not too much to list what color has what signal goes to what unit in that technical document. It helps everybody be on the same page.
Yeah, I've actually asked for copies of my A1's paperwork and my V1's paperwork so that I could include some of that in the tech book if I need to, or if they, you know, God forbid they get sick beforehand or whatever, I can hand it off to somebody else. But it's absolutely, you know, the more information, the better. What pair, what malt, what color, where is it going from, where is it going to? Absolutely.
So here's a question around Cat 5, Cat 6. We saw a couple different questions kind of asking the same thing. Where is that point where it becomes so much stuff rides Cat 5 now, right? And where is that demarc where, okay, I'm just going to bring 4 pull boxes and I'm going to run these cables. Now, this obviously is not necessarily a 5-hour set shoot strike, okay?
Right,
Although I very well could be going through the truck and finding 3 300-foot pieces, or, you know, three 299-foot pieces of Cat 5.
Mm-hmm.
And reusing those. But, you know, what are your guys' thought about running cable and as well as, you know, terminating on site? When does that start to be more advantageous than, you know, pulling something out of the bay?
I mean, for us, it's infrastructure based. We've made sure, I mean, networking is such a huge part of what we do now. Every single truck has a remote rack of some sort. Maybe it's our booth kit, maybe it's our stage box for entertainment shows, but it's not just audio I/O. Our audio stage boxes, which are 64 in, 32 out, standard MADI, also have 2 discrete paths of networking built in, a gig network and a 100 base T, separate networks, 2 HDSDI inputs, 2 HDSDI outputs, and all that audio infrastructure with redundant fibers if there's a failure on the cable. That all happens on a single run of fiber for us. So we might need that networking for robotic cameras or for some kind of internet feed from the venue if we're live streaming. But everything we build out, we're working network protocol into because it's obviously becoming how our world is going to communicate. We're not IP video yet, but we know it's coming. So we're making sure that infrastructure is in place anywhere we can. To your point about field termination, especially for data cables, if I'm putting an end on, if it's not a repair, I assume that's throwaway cable. We typically keep a 1,000-foot box on the truck for just, oh, by the way. We have a crate of prepped and built Cat 5 and Cat 6 cable, but we always have that throwaway 1,000 feet and a crimper and a bag of ends for the, oh, by the way, kind of stuff. And at the end of the show, I expect that to be trash. That's expendable. I don't want to try to label that and save that in the bucket. That's just to get us out of jail free cable on site.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think about all the ski remotes and all the race car remotes I've done, and all the telephone trunk line. This is before we were using network cable, a JK. Over the years, having been to the same ski remote facility or racetrack, I would see just piles and piles. Each time they would run new ones, and I always wondered why that was. And maybe it's just more convenient, and it does make sense from a labor cost point of view sometimes just to abandon the cable.
Well, for us, it won't become truck stock unless it's been built in the shop, shrink wrapped, labeled, tested. You know, if it's something we throw an end on site, it's typically a last minute addition or it's a spare that we had to run, and I don't trust it. You know, if it's a long enough piece, we might throw it back on and chop it up later. But to me, that's worked into the expendable budget with gaff tape and Sharpies and everything else. And then if we need real cable, we'll build that at the shop, test it correctly, make sure it's built to spec with the labels, with the grade of cable we like. You know, the box of throwaway might have come from Lowe's or Home Depot, and I don't want it in truck inventory because I just don't trust it. It'll get us through the day, but I don't want it to be part of our inventory.
Yep. John Christie is asking about poly tubing and waterproofing. Also asked the question, who's responsible for this? The client, the mobile, the rental company? Who provided the government? Wow. Is the government involved in this now? Okay. Well, that's just best practices kind of stuff. You know, that's just, if I don't want a bad day, I'm blessed to live in California, and so although it's raining today and it's very atypical for this time of year for rain, but typically most of the summer there's no rain. But if I'm working the show in the middle of the country back east, and I'm going to make sure that everything is going to have some, the ends are going to have some kind of a plastic on it, whatever, however it's done, just to make sure, because I don't want to get screamed at for having a mic sound, filthy because water got in it, and it's an easy fix. Now, the truck typically will have plastic tubing, for putting over cables, or at least plastic bags. It just makes sense. I don't think you have to bring your own.
I think to answer Kelly's question, it's the truck's responsibility. We carry a weather kit on every truck that has tarps of various sizes, garbage bags, the tubing. But Mike made a great point earlier. As an A2 or as a utility, spend $10 and put 50 feet of it in your pack so you can be the hero if the truck runs out. It costs 8 cents for 20 feet of it. Why not carry some and be prepared? But it would be under the truck's responsibility to protect their equipment. They would just have the expectation that the crew watches their back. I mean, I might not know that we have not secured where the DT butt farm is. I would depend on my crew to tell me, hey, dummy, we're going to the bar. You need to go tape up your cable. Right.
As an A1, A2, I don't want to have to run out there and fix it during the bad weather. I want to know that it's protected. It's going to last for the 1 day, 2 day, however long the show is. So a little advanced preparation. Also have a roll of electrical tape, maybe some cable ties if you need it to put that stuff on and seal the ends. Absolutely, to have all that, definitely.
It gets back into our crewing discussion. I mean, Mike, when you're booking your crew, are you going to hire the guy that asks you for a Sharpie for the 30th time that season? Or are you going to book the guy that brings a small tool bag with him and is handing out Sharpies to the crew that needs them? I mean, it's not a requirement, but it certainly might move you up the list.
It didn't say in the tech book that I needed a Q box.
It's correct.
It's just one of those things that should probably show up. Right.
And I think that's, that was one of the questions we had to discuss today, which you've been answering all day long. Is what are those things that people, are expected to bring? What are those things that are nice to bring? We saw a statement in here that, some people were saying, they feel the expectation is that they have to have a laptop there to program gear, right? And
if you're being hired to program, if you're the Riedel programmer or the AZ edit programmer and want to have your own equipment, just like people who bring their own parts to make their job better, I'd say bring your own equipment. It's not required, but you certainly can do a better job when you have a piece of hardware that works rather than something that is just in the drawer on the truck.
There's an extreme level of that. there's some tech extremes I've seen among a lot of camera operators. The trend now is to bring your own external viewfinder, which in many cases is better than the one that comes with the camera. Higher resolution, brighter output.
Right.
But when it takes the third and fourth request of a zip tie or more tape or something else to make your add-on gear work beside the studio viewfinder that works just fine, then you're pushing your luck a little bit. I want you to be comfortable, but
Right.
you know, they're having to borrow magic arms and clamps and this and that and a power adapter. You know what? Just use the viewfinder. But I have no problem when people bring their own hardware if it makes their life easier. I encourage it, in fact, just as long as it doesn't impede the progress of the show.
And as long as you get it back at the end of the day, I've seen people do that and set the truck gear aside, use their own gear, and then lose the truck gear. So, you know, to your point, you know, you have to protect the truck's investment as well. So,
we lost a really nice Sony studio viewfinder because they dropped it from their camera platform while they were installing their own, and it was 10 grand. And Sony said, I can't replace it. You have to get a new one. And it was one of the really nice OLED big studio viewfinders. And I ultimately had to eat the cost. And I know the operator didn't mean to do it, but it was one of those, really, did you have to be farting with that right now? So unfortunately it happened, but it doesn't happen a lot.
Right.
Well, that's an interesting point because, you know, the dilemma of if I carry this and use it in the show, whose fault is it if it fails? Right? We had that discussion in the A1 panel when your booth A2 says, "Hey, I got a nice loom. I've got this whole rig ready for you," right? Which is very well-meaning, and probably, you know, as long as it's all faxed out and this thing is solid, you're golden. You got a marginal channel. Now I'm having to explain to my producer or to the director why something isn't working because they were trying to be nice and that was great, right? Or if you're using a piece of gear that's in show position, like in my case, I've got some playback systems that I like to use, whether that's Spot On, whether that's QLab, depends on the show, right? And also Ableton. However, if I'm going to use that in show, I better be prepared with a backup system because I'm now assuming that liability. I've assumed that responsibility. It's one thing when, you know, hey, I can't get into AZ Edit, or I don't want to sit where the control PC is. I want to be outside because it's a really nice day.
Yeah,
okay,
you're
well,
required to bring a second computer to cover yourself.
right. But your show's not going to go off the air because your laptop couldn't log into AZ Edit, you know, on your Sun lounger, right? Go back in the truck, go sit there, right? But you know, meanwhile, if you're bringing hardware, that's kind of where I see the demarc there. Is like if you're bringing hardware that is going to now affect the show very directly with its failure or its success, you definitely want to think twice about that.
We have a phrase: you can't scarecrow that. You know, if the client or producer comes to you and I want to scarecrow and say, "Wasn't me," well, you know, Kelly the A2 is an extension of me. And if you used your home loom for the booth kit and it failed, that represents me. So there's no pointing. It's on you. So I think your point, you gotta fax it well and make sure there's a backup line in place and make sure that's been equally faxed and then hope for the best because sometimes there's no coming back from that.
Yeah, if you're on a marginal truck, okay, you kind of get that. You know, if every time you're on that truck, half of those looms don't work and yours does, okay, well, that's probably a good reason to carry your own loom. A state-of-the-art truck that has brand new gear, I'm pretty sure we could shame you, Nick, into getting it fixed and making sure yours works. I'm not too worried there, right? Here's a question Gary posed that he has two questions. Can we bring our drinks in the theater? And I'd like to hear the panel's opinion on the difference between a tech manager and an ops producer, right? You know, we hear a lot of new terms coming out or positions. Maybe that's because roles are consolidated. I don't know, but let's start with you, Nick, and then Mike, why don't you weigh in on that? And of course, Rahm.
My initial knee jerk is as soon as you use the P word, when producer is involved, to me, producer equals budget. So if it's an ops producer, that means they have some influence on the budget. They can affect spending, they can add sub-rentals, they can determine day rates. I feel like a tech manager, a true tech manager, doesn't have as much say in how money is spent. So an ops producer, to me, has the ability to say, yes, buy another hour of bird time, or yes, we're halfway through the day and we're not done, bring in another A2 if we have to, whereas the tech manager has to kind of make what they have on site work. So that's my knee jerk to hearing that. But you're right, there's new positions being invented, and sometimes those roles haven't been well defined, and you kind of have to test the waters. But I think as long as you treat every crew member with an equal amount of respect and assume that somebody is related to the end client, then you'll be safe. But again, producer to me equals budgetary input, if not control, whether it's on the ops side or any other side.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I agree with Nick completely. It's two separate parts of the product. The budgetary and then the managing part of it. I think you nailed it. The tech producer, tech manager, doesn't have any, not necessarily influence, but they don't have any effect on the budgetary part of it. So that's where the separation is.
Yeah. And again, just to slam this point home, the title of this webinar is Set, Shoot, Strike. And if you're on a set, shoot, strike show that has a tech manager and an ops manager, that's pretty cool. And yes, you do want to have the laptop for your chaise lounge because it must be that groovy a show.
It's very rare. There's a lot of shows where there isn't even an EIC other than the truck EIC. The crewer will appoint a POC, what's called a point of contact, and it might be the camera guy or the TD, and they're essentially handling timesheets. And that's really about it, where there really isn't. Yeah, they're a crew chief, but they're limited in that once they're on the air, it's not like they could walk away from their camera or their tape machine and handle an issue. So there's a lot of those shows out there where the truck EIC will take that weight on and have to deal with the issues because there isn't anybody else to handle it.
And just to point out, Dan brought this up, the ops producer title, we've been talking about tech producer, right? Because we've been seeing more and more of those roles, or maybe that coordinator for a given department, right, on a more expansive show. But Dan brings up ops producer is the ESPN term for a tech manager, right? Maybe giving them the name of producer versus say that manager, I don't know, but that's thanks for making that clarification, Dan.
No, but there is a difference. There is actually a big difference between an ops producer and a tech manager. You can call it whatever you want if you want to make that title flexible, but in reality, there's a big difference between a tech manager and an ops producer. They work in different. It's like the difference between a director and a producer. They have some crossover, but they're very distinct in what they do. And as Mike said, typically an ops producer will have some budgetary influence, whereas a tech manager is just there to make sure that everything got there, everything leaves there, and everybody's functioning well, and make sure that things, if there's a truck side are going well, if it's fly pack, that everything got delivered and placed well, and that nobody's, throwing feces at each other like that monkey on the switcher you had earlier on.
Right, and to that point, we had somebody make a good comment that the iPhone taking a picture of everything as it comes out. Right,
Mark Kennedy.
When you're tired, one of the best ways to deal with that is having the pictures, go back to it, look at it. Here we go. Are all my holes filled up again? With the proper things. I do want to clarify something where I may have that Mr. Mitchell made a statement with on another webinar that they were talking about the general AV tech. I was talking about the laptop and what do you think your responsibility is? His point was that a lot of companies are expecting the technician to show up with the actual operating computer, right? Or to, as part of that, or an advanced RF type of thing. And that, to me, just speaking personally, again, I'll go back to my example. If it's something that's required to make a piece of hardware operate, that's the job of the vendor, right? That comes with the hardware, right? If you want to bring something that makes what you do more efficient, sets you apart, that's kind of your decision. Like in my case, you know, if I'm doing RF, you know, I'm probably going to want to have all my tools with me. Now, are they paying for all those? No. Do they maybe hire me because I bring more than somebody else? I certainly don't bring as much as Pete does to a show. But yes, I'm going to do that because that's something I want. I make that choice. But if it's the core operating hardware, you know, that to me is a pretty clean demark that it's like, you know, here you go.
I think
Right,
the
but
key is communicating there. I mean, if I expected someone, an A1, an RF tech, to bring hardware, and then I communicated that, I would expect to be billed for that. Not exorbitantly, but match what a VER, PRG, or a Rentex would charge for a laptop. $75, $100 to bring a programming laptop, as long as it's not a surprise. Don't add that to your invoice and expect me just to not to notice. It's a text message swap. It's a phone call. Hey, you're asking me to do some heavy duty stuff. I have some software I prefer. I'd like to bring my own hardware, but I'm gonna add $50 or $100 to my invoice. Get the okay for it first, and then there's no surprise. Because the alternative is, well, I'm not gonna bring that laptop. So Nick, what do you expect me to use to get the job done? And then it's back on me. So I think that's the key there. It's acceptable if it's discussed and there's no surprises. What I hate is when I get that invoice with 15 things listed that I had no idea were coming. So I think communication can go a long way there.
The other thing that happens, go ahead, Ron.
I was going to say, there are a lot of tools that we bring. Look, you don't have to do anything but show up, but you don't have to be hired again. I want to bring what I wanted. I want to bring what's going to make the show easy for me and make the show better. And I don't have to have, I don't have to brandish the fact that, well, you know, I don't have to do this. You can't make me do this. That kind of stuff. And there's some comments that I've seen in some of the remarks or questions here that kind of chop my ass a little bit. Bring what you need to do. Bring what makes you comfortable. Be a hero. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not curing cancer. Nobody's asking you to buy a Buick and deliver it to the show. You bring what's in your bag, what makes you comfortable. If you don't want to bring it, don't bring it. If it's expected of you, then, you know, okay, like Nick says, then, you know, set it up beforehand that you'll be compensated for it if that's what you feel is necessary, or not, either way. But, you know, this attitude of you can't make me do it, or I'm not going to touch that light because I'm an audio guy. I'm sorry if I'm insulting anybody out there, but I don't have room for that. I think that, especially in the set, shoot, strike world, we need flexibility and ambition. And, you know, unfortunately, bringing back to something that I was talking about earlier, there are a lot of people who show up to work a lot that I saw in the set, shoot, strike world that really didn't deserve to be there, but for reason, fasting, understanding, ended up being on the cruise sheet, you know, constantly. And it's not always fair. Not everybody like Mike gets to be the crewer and gets to say, you know what, if you boned me on this show, it's not very likely you're going to get on the next show. Not everybody has that kind of power. I'm just saying.
You know, the other thing, to bounce off what Nick was saying about invoicing for extras that you might bring to a show, the minute you start to give that kind of stuff away and the producer or director gets comfortable with the A1 providing an iPad to play back music or anything that makes their load a little bit lighter, well, the next time that A1's not available and another A1 comes in, the producer has that expectation like, well, he provided this and I didn't get billed for it last time. Why aren't you providing it? So I think the communication is important, but you know, you have to be careful not to put the person that comes in after you. And I'm speaking to a local show, not necessarily the big network shows, but that person's not going to get put into an awkward situation with a producer or director like, oh, I don't own an iPad. I can't bring an iPad. If you wanted me to rent one for you, I gladly would have had I known. But, you know, so that it's a fine line between doing what's good for you, but, you know, making sure that you're compensated for it when it's that type of item.
Absolutely. You know, there's a question here. And I'll point this one to you, Nick, because I know you and I talked briefly about it a week or so ago, and obviously during that A1, A2 panel, I brought this up on there saying, okay, while the truck companies aren't necessarily up at full capacity right now, which was kind of unusual, right? Do we have some opportunities for people to get in and spend some time on AZ Edit, to spend some time on gear that normally that's under the pressure of the show, right? And I mean, I've looked online. I went onto eBay to see how much to pick up, you know, a small little, you know, RTS frame. Probably not going to spend that this week because, you know, I probably like to pay my mortgage and things like that versus buying a frame. But that idea of saying, how do I better myself during this? And, you know, is that something where you see maybe with proper precautions, some of your trucks that are in the shop, open houses for the region, people being able to say, hey, I'd love to get 4 or 5 hours behind an Atom frame to bring more value to somebody?
I think number one is there's an amazing amount of information online. We have, during our COVID break, made probably 20 training videos just internally, just our own engineers doing a required webinar for our staff to watch and participate in. But what we found is a lot of these already exist. So the first thing I would ask your local TV truck vendor is, hey, do you know of any training resources? And if they don't have anything to offer, I think it's absolutely appropriate to ask to come in and spend some time. Now, remember, most TV trucks are a U-Haul truck before and after the show. So if they're parked in the lot, they're probably closed up, packed up, not easily powered up. But if they're doing maintenance like we are and cleaning and upgrades, I would be thrilled to have any person I even had a little bit of a relationship with. If I've never heard your name before, probably not. If I associate you being very close to maybe a competing mobile unit vendor, maybe not. But if you're somebody that's done a show or two and we have a good rapport, I would be thrilled to invite anybody into play, to sit with my engineers, to share that knowledge and to share internal resources. And I think most other OB truck vendors would feel the same way. They want their crew to be as smart as possible because when their hardware works well, it makes them look good.
Right.
So why wouldn't you want people coming in, becoming more familiar with your hardware?
The other thing it does on, the topic of the show is set, shoot, strike. If the day A1 has more time with the Atom, is more comfortable, it takes that pressure off of the EIC to constantly go in and out of the audio room to help him or her program things, get things mapped out, whatever. And I could
They've got enough
experience back in the day of Trio Video when they had their shop here. When they put in their first cow rack, I called them, hey, can I come in and mess with the cow rack? And I walked in, truck was open, it was powered up, the audio room was ready to go, and they were glad to have me because it makes, like I said, on that show day, it makes things easier for them. The more knowledge I have, and then I've also trained other A1s for them. Hey, this is how the cow rack works. This is what you do. Input, output, whatever. So it helps the truck vendor a lot as well.
Timing is critical. I mean, the question to ask is, are you guys doing any training internally? At this point, our fleet is 60% CalRec, another 30 or 40%-ish is the Studer Soundcraft line, and we're having to do some cross training internally. And this is the perfect time for that. If a freelancer wanted to capitalize on that, hey, can I sit in on your webinar? Can I come to the shop when you guys are doing it? My response would be, hey, we've already done the training, but come on back, I'll do some one-on-one. Or, hey, we've got one coming up in a week. Are you free on this date? We'd love to have you. But now's the time to ask. I think quarantine ending is still kind of uncertain. What would Los Angeles say, the other day? They're close till August 1st. So now's the time to ask for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's that going that extra mile, right? To build relationships in the world we're in right now. The everything's on the table discussions where, whatever region you work or base out of, trying to whatever it is necessary to make ourselves better at our jobs. I was a couple comments came in. This one question I thought it's kind of interesting. When would you guys see using an alpha or beta gear in an on-air application, right? Before it's necessarily in production, have you ever had that opportunity? Do you always say, look, now there absolutely under no circumstances do I do any gear that isn't fully in production? Any thoughts around that one?
I'd love to experiment. I've experimented with microphones, with cameras. Absolutely. Any chance you get to to be on the ground floor of a potential new product? Absolutely. And
yeah,
it
but
also
show
helps
critical
you.
stuff is different.
No, not necessarily show critical, but a side by side with a microphone. If there's a prototype microphone that comes out, I'll have my show microphone and put the prototype next to it and A/B them throughout the day. Maybe record one and go back and listen and see how it sounded. So absolutely, experimentation. It's what keeps it fresh and exciting and fun as well, instead of doing the same thing.
Right, but you don't want a beta version of firmware on your console for your show.
No.
Or a beta comms unit. No, that you can't.
No,
the example I can think of is
manufacturer won't do it.
With all this VR and AR stuff. We'll put a VR camera beside our 4K or HD cameras. We've done some ambisonic audio work recently alongside of a traditional 2-mix show. Mm-hmm. So we'll complement the show we're doing with the new gear. But like Mike and Rom both said, I'd never replace show critical gear as a test. I don't even upgrade firmware or software until I have to. But experimentation, absolutely, you have to. You have to be able to speak the language. I didn't know what ambisonic meant 2 years ago, and now I throw the term around like I know what I'm talking about. So there you go. It makes you automatically.
Right. So speaking of terminology that's out there, Remy, right? Where this remote production, you mentioned PGA, Nick, and things like that. When this starts, when sports kicks back in, and it will, where do you see Remy, and where does the audio person and the video person, for that matter, where does everybody still fit in that world?
I mean, we're doing Remy for PGA now, and I'd always seen the show side of it. I knew we had a magic box that took 8 SDIs in and all embedded audio, and over our uplink or our fiber, it went back to Jacksonville. But I tell you, 2 years ago, when I stood in the PGA control room in Jacksonville and watched the other side of it, was one of the first times it truly impacted me how this technology will change our industry. We've been doing it for years, but seeing a director, TD, EVS, graphics, A1, color and play-by-play, 8 states away, participating in this broadcast in real time, it's stunning. And I tell you what COVID has brought to our attention is we're doing Remy models for entertainment shows. We're sending multi-viewers and PL back to a director who's in a different state, who's calling a musical performance or a virtual award show. And I personally have not heard of any other entertainments being done in a Remy model. We've done 3 in the last 2 months, and it works. I mean, you can't direct to the beat of the snare drum, but you can get pretty darn close. And if it means keeping people at a safe distance from the truck, I think they're willing to make up for a little bit of that lag or a little bit of that delay. So I think we're going to see Remy on the entertainment, corporate, all these other sides, not just sports. On the sports side, I think we're going to see a whole lot more of it.
Absolutely. And Mike, how about you? What's your feeling, not just from the station perspective, but maybe even with the local sports, regional sports side you've been from?
I agree with Nick. I think it's only going to continue. It's been happening for a couple of years, and it's just going to become more and more prevalent in this industry. So, I think people need to be prepared for it, and I definitely think it's going to continue.
You still got the A2 role, right? They're the big. Yeah. The big role is really, it probably impacts the truck companies, frankly, Nick. I'm obviously by extension, the additional A1s and the V1s and all those positions. But you guys, that's probably going to be something that you're navigating much more differently.
It's an additional hardware requirement, and most of it comes down to bandwidth. I mean, the more fiber that gets put across our infrastructure in this country, as 5G technology continues to roll out, getting that data off-site in close to real time is what's really moving the needle on that. I hear from a lot of freelancers, as Remy moves to new market, you're screwing us out of our jobs. And the exact opposite is true. We're adding jobs. Now, the director, TV, EVS are in a different state, but we're still hiring a director. They might be doing 2 games in a day, whereas before they could only do 1. But now I need additional video engineering support in 2 locations. At the truck site, there are still camera operators there. Now we've experimented with remote camera operation. You still need a camera person. They're just in a different place. So it is shifting where the crew roles take place. But my personal experience has been that the net effect is that there are just as many, if not 1 or 2 more crew positions overall, It just may not be in your market. And that still stings. There's no question that still stings. But we're not eliminating positions like maybe robocams in a newsroom did 5 or 10 years ago. That eliminated positions. Newsrooms don't have floor directors and camera ops like they used to. In Remy Sports, we still need as many people, just in different places.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting point you make there, Nick, and I think it ties into kind of a recurring theme, which is the network person, meaning not the IT network, not like the network broadcast person, but rather the fact that, you know, I'm still going to be doing audio. I still have to be that A2 in the field, helping getting PLs in place, getting mics onto this player on the field, but I'm going to be looked upon to be more of a network, have a better understanding of IT than ever before. And that's where maybe that network plus, or, you know, that type of training is oddly enough something that, and if you're strong in RF, you're going to be equally a good A2 as well, because there's things that you still can't do as efficiently remotely. And at the end of the day, when it comes to troubleshooting, you're going to have to be able to have that knowledge to get into a box. You know, we look at a lot of the Wheatstone products, obviously the Calrec products for these gateways, right? And this is going to be become more prevalent. So IT, you know, IP infrastructure understanding essential, right, to our jobs going forward. I mean, we heard that from Fred and Scott very clearly, where they were like, I am letting the next generation embrace Dante, IP enablement, SMPTE 2110, you know, whatever nomenclature you want to throw at it. The point is, we're living in a networked world going forward, and that is probably where the greatest amount of opportunity is, right? I see our time. I want to show one slide real quick, because being the don't tell my family, but I am an eternal optimist. I don't act like it all the time, but this photo, you know, being a Chicago guy and the Cubs winning the World Series. Now, we all understood that this was nearly impossible in the years past, but it has since come to happen. So that's good sign for COVID. COVID is going to go away. The post-COVID world, COVIDs are with us for the rest of our life. All right. So let's embrace this. Let's say, where are my opportunities in this marketplace? We're going to come out and we're going to do more shows. We're going to do sporting events again. We're going to do a lot of really neat stuff in the years to come. We aren't going to do them in the next few weeks, and that's just the reality of it. But just like the Cubs won the World Series, this too shall pass. We will succeed. We will win. We will overcome all the COVID challenges. I'm going to remain optimistic. You know, Rom, any closing thoughts?
Well, you know, I'm just happy that we had this opportunity to talk. I hope the discussion continues. You know, at the end of this, you're going to see some of our IP, our email addresses shot up there, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in communicating with any of us not to be bashful. Look, you know, we are a very niche market, and we're some of us silverbacks have been not exactly this for sure, but we've been through these sorts of things before, and we came out of it. And yes, the world changes each time, but we make adjustments. And so banding together and helping each other out, you know, buying that extra piece of equipment if you have to, being nice with the alcohol wipes, all that stuff. We're going to have to figure it out, but we will. And we look forward to seeing what's next.
Absolutely. And thank you, Nick. Thanks, Mike, for making the time to be with us today. Really, really appreciate it. Lots of great questions, lots of great points. We'll look forward to what the future has to offer. And Pete's moving our thing around, but you know, that's all right. It's live webinaring.
Kelly, I'd love to sneak in a closing thought if I could.
Absolutely, please do, man.
I would feel remiss if I didn't give a big thanks to the many tech managers that helped kind of chart my course for me. I started really young in television, and for some reason, a handful of people let some yapping kid on a set and answered questions and showed them things. So to, Kent and Rambo and Todd and Tim and Joe and all the tech managers out there that helped chart my course, I have to thank them. And I want to encourage the 47 or so folks still listening. Everybody on this call has a skill. If you're new to the industry, if you're a production assistant all the way up to executive producers, take this time that we're kind of shut down and find somebody you can mentor to. I've had the great opportunity to speak to a number of high school and college classes. This is a great time to share that knowledge and pass the torch a bit. And you will create a career for somebody, because people did it for me. I would not have a job or be able to pay my mortgage if people hadn't let me just be around and ask questions and be an annoying yappy kid, but they did. And I feel like I owe that to as many generations as I'll be around for. So thank you for having me on today. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And Hip, thanks for all the many things you've done with me, with the Chicago market. Obviously, if you've got any closing thoughts that you want to share, any people, we've noticed that too, besides how we got into the business, but those people that were responsible for helping us find the success we found.
Absolutely. If it weren't for a guy like Dave Grunwig, I don't know where I would be right now. He, like Nick was explaining, he really opened up a door for me. He gave me a lot of opportunities. He let me be, a donkey from Shrek and stand in the corner of the audio room and, why are you doing this? How come you're doing this? And he really took me under his wing. And
love Dave.
Yeah, Dave's great. So, it's guys like Dave that, everybody, there's a mentor out there for you. Find somebody that let them ask you, those questions, and build up the next generation. So absolutely.
You bet. And this is that, Nick. I think that was a great point you made. Is that's what these webinars are about. They're about sharing experiences. Equally what works and doesn't work, where we found success, and equally where we found failure. My list of failures are quite long. I'm more than happy to share them with folks if they want to send me an email. But we have a lot to give to those around us. Let's take this opportunity to do that, and let's keep building on that. Pete, I'm going to throw this back over to you so everybody can copy down one more. I wanted to do a quick throw out to Dave Grunwig there. He was in the photo on the left there. He's been on a couple of our panels now, and it's so vital that people, and obviously Taco was in there as well, people that want to be great examples of success and sharing. So thanks again, everybody. We'll look forward to Friday's topic, and everybody joining us. In fact, what time we start on Friday, Pete? That's 4 o'clock. Yep. And this is all around Axient Digital RF. Those of you who have been in the business at least for 3 weeks will have come across Axient Digital microphones, and we're diving in deep. We've talked about what we thought was every possible way of dealing with the antenna systems, but we're going to get in deep to quadversity, frequency diversity, and we even have a doctor in physics, or actually in electrical engineering, Dr. Mark Kinkle, and then Michael Johns from Shure are going to join us. So please tune in. It's going to be really interesting, and we're going to demystify a few more things about digital audio. And meanwhile, great evening to everybody, and so long.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Alligator.